Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome all of you, our faculty, students, community members, distinguished guests. My name is Larry Alford. I'm the University Chief Librarian at the University of Toronto, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the University of Toronto and to the University Libraries, and particularly to the East Asian Library, one of the great East Asian libraries and collections in North America and certainly in Canada. But before we begin today, I do wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and for many of us to live on this land. So I always think it's incredibly important to acknowledge the First Nations people who were the first stewards of this land. I am privileged to live over one of Toronto's ravines, and it's beautiful to look down on, but when one walks through it, you can also see it was the meeting place of many Indigenous peoples from across Ontario and North America, and you can see how destructive the past 200 years have been, and hopefully working with Indigenous peoples, we can begin to restore places like the beautiful ravines in Toronto. So I want to welcome you all here today for the grand opening of this exhibit, this extraordinary exhibit, Education for Troubled Times, The Life and Legacy of James G. Endicott. The exhibition is hosted by the Chung Tung East Asian Library with sponsorship, and we're always delighted to work with our partners from the upper floor of Robarts Library, the Department of East Asian Studies here at the University of Toronto. We're very grateful for their contribution to this exhibit. And we're very grateful for this opportunity to learn more about the remarkable life of Mr. Endicott, whose work as a missionary leader, advocate, and organizer began when he was actually a student here at the University of Toronto at Victoria College. A major part of his work was advocating for the needs of the communities he served, and in particular working to foster connection, understanding, and friendship across political divides and across continents, something that is incredibly important today. This long-standing and essential partnership between the East Asian Library and the East Asian Studies Department advances similar values of community connection and cross-cultural dialogue. For many years, we've worked together to derive critical research and promote lasting connections here at the University of Toronto and well beyond. With this in mind, it's a pleasure to see so many colleagues gathered here today to listen and to learn from this amazing, this very carefully curated collection of materials, personal reflections, and notes that tell Mr. Endicott's remarkable and moving story. I believe strongly, as a librarian, that it is the purpose of libraries to cultivate this type of integral learning experience, to provide space, to provide collections, to be a place for collaboration designed to engage and inspire our entire community, and to build collaborations within the university, with multiple universities, but also globally and across the world. We at the University of Toronto have a number of partnerships with institutions in China, and we value very much those partnerships and the collaborations and facilitation of research that they make possible. I'd like to thank some of our speakers and partners who've made today's events possible. So Mark Lush and Carol Ma, where are they? They're over here. Yes. They've done incredible work curating today's exhibition, particularly while managing workloads as Ph.D. candidates. I don't know how quite you did that, but it's amazing work. I hope you're proud of your achievements, as proud as we are, because we really are very proud to have this exhibit, to host this exhibit here in the East Asian Library. Professor Yiqing Wu, I want to thank for representing there you are, for representing the East Asian Studies Department, and for your ongoing partnership and collaboration with the libraries. It's always great to see our colleagues from the East Asian Department and to work with them. I also want to acknowledge, recognize, and thank Marion Endicott, who's sitting on the front row here, and members of the Endicott family. I believe there are 12 or 13 of your sisters, children, cousins, all of that here. We really thank you for joining us this afternoon. We really look forward to your firsthand accounts of your grandfather's work, experiences, and reflections. and Professor Joan Judge, who's sitting here at the front as well. We're grateful that you've joined us today from York University to provide some keynote remarks today, to share your thoughts on the cultural impact of the missionary work of James Mellon Menzies and Mr. Endicott from a historian's perspective. Finally, I'd also like to acknowledge the representatives here today from the Consulate General of the People's Republic of China, Vice Consul Guo Jian, and Vice Consul Wang Yifei. Sitting on the front row here, we're truly honored to have you here today. Thank you for being here. So as the world moves further into a period of political unrest and uncertainty, Mr. Endicott's lifelong commitment to cultural understanding and peace feels more relevant than ever. With this in mind, I want to thank all of you again once more for being here. I want to thank the curators of this amazing exhibit for the work they've done. Your engagement with this exhibit will help keep a transformative legacy alive to inspire future generations of activists, of educators, of scholars. So with that, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome Hannah Kim, who's the director of the East Asian Library, to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Larry, for your very insightful opening remarks. Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Kim. I'm the director of the Cheongju East Asian Library here at the University of Toronto, and I will be your MC this afternoon. So this exhibition honors the remarkable legacy of James G. Endicott, a missionary, educator, and peace advocate who played a significant role in shaping China-Canada relations in the 20th century. His lifelong commitment to bridging divides and fostering understanding and peace between nations, even during times of political tension, offers a powerful lesson that remains deeply relevant today. This exhibition is part of an ongoing effort by the East Asian Library to highlight Canada's historical engagement with China. In 2017, our library had the honor of hosting Canadians in China, old photographs from Sichuan, 1892 to 1952, in partnership with the Canadian School Alumni Association of the Canadian School of West China. The exhibition showcased photos and stories that gave a glimpse into over 60 years of Canadian missionary work in China, highlighting the deep historical ties between the two nations. As we continue to explore more about their contributions and dedication, I'm deeply honored, humbled by their commitment to fostering connections and understanding across cultures. Since Larry has already acknowledged our speakers, distinguished guests, and community members, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for being here and supporting the East Asian Library. This exhibition would not have been possible without the passion and scholarship of the two Ph.D. students, Mark Lush and Kaifang, who approached our library last summer with their very thoughtful proposal of this exhibition. I'd like to sincerely thank Mark and Kara for their intellectual curiosity, dedication, and hard work, which have been instrumental in shaping this exhibit. We are very fortunate to have had the opportunity to collaborate with such promising scholars in the field of Chinese studies. I'd also like to thank our amazing East Asian Library team, especially Lucy Gang, for her close support throughout the project, as well as Chloe Yuan and Ko Wang, our graduate student assistants, for their contributions. And of course, a big thank you to all of our staff members who helped make today's event possible. And a special thanks goes to E.J. Pratt Library at Victoria University in the University of Toronto for generously lending us the 1921 and 1923 editions of Torontonensis, the university's yearbook, which offers a fascinating window into student life of that era. Our colleagues, Colin and Laura, should be in the audience somewhere. Yeah, they're at the back. Thank you so much for your support. So lastly, I'd like to express my deepest thanks to Endicott family for their generous support of this exhibition in so many ways. And we're honored to have you with us today. Thank you. So this exhibition will be on display until April 30th this year. We hope it inspires a reflection on Endicott's transformative legacy and encourage future generations of scholars, educators, and activists to champion cultural understanding and peace. Thank you. Okay, so it's an exciting part. It is my great pleasure to invite Mark Lush, a Ph.D. candidate in modern Chinese history at the University of Toronto Department of East Asian Studies, and one of our talented exhibition curators. Mark's research explores the prominent role that China's past played in Mao-era political campaigns. By blending intellectual and social history, he examines how historical narratives were used to further both state goals and individual political interests. Please join me in welcoming Mark.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let me start by thanking everyone for attending the launch of this exhibition on the life and legacy of James Gareth Endicott, a Canadian missionary and peace activist who helped shape the relationship between Canada and China in the first half of the 20th century. It's wonderful to see such a large crowd gathered here today, and I think this might speak to the importance of telling this story at our present moment. Before I share my thoughts on working on this exhibition, though, I will continue the trend of saying a few thank yous first. There were many people who made this work possible that I'd like to acknowledge. I'd like to take a moment to thank, first and foremost, the Endicott family, who have generously allowed us to display many of the incredible objects and photographs that you see here today. Thank you, Marion, Val, and Orion, for your tireless efforts. We really appreciate your dedication to this project. Thanks to our wonderful hosts here at the East Asian Library. Thanks to our director, Hannah Kim, director of the East Asian Library, Lucy Gan, who's been a tremendous help on this project throughout, as well as Chloe Yuan and Ke Wong for your help and support. Finally, I'd like to thank Joan Judge, our speaker here today, and I know we're all very much looking forward to hearing your talk, and my mentor, Yiqing Wu, for your guidance, Kara Ma, for my co-curator, for her expertise and patience, and my wife, Marley. When I began work on this exhibition, if you had asked me then what I thought about the connection between Canadian and Chinese history in the first half of the 20th century, or for that matter, the connection between the University of Toronto and some of the pivotal moments that have now come to define China's recent past, I might have asked you in turn, what connection? Now, in the process of curating this exhibit, it has become apparent to me just how tightly woven together these stories really are. History so often comes to us in the form of prepackaged national containers. Canada in the first century after Confederation, or modern Chinese history, the titles that fill university course listings. But these histories never really sit comfortably within their national containers. So often, they transgress the boundaries we try to draw around them, much like Jim Endicott transgressed the assumed political or national loyalties expected of him as a Canadian living through the Cold War. Working on this project has really encouraged me to think about connections in place, the places where we live, work, and study, and the obligations or reciprocity that we might owe to one another across boundaries, whether they be national, religious, political, or social. And I hope it will encourage you to do the same. One thing that became clear to me as I learned more about James Endicott's life and remarkable career was the degree to which his ideas and political commitments were informed by the social reality he encountered on the ground. One gets a sense that it was the personal relationships he forged that really mattered to him, and which, ultimately had the power to alter the trajectory of his life. I think one can get a sense of the impact that these relationships had on James's life through some of the objects displayed here today. Through the mementos and keepsakes collected over a lifetime, the kinds of things that inadvertently document our lives. Photographs of life in a new home to be sent back to friends and family in Canada, a poem written on a silk banner, an autograph yearbook signed by students at the semester's end. In this way, the exhibition provides us with a much more intimate understanding of some of the big ideas and historical forces discussed in university lecture halls. Missionary activity in inland China, Chinese nationalism or communism, the hostility and suspicion of the Cold War era. I'd like to close by remarking on the timing of this exhibition. When I began my PhD, before the global pandemic, I won't say exactly which year I started my PhD, the world and the state of Canada-China relations in particular were in a very different place. At present, when the world once again finds itself divided in ways that recall the conflicts of the last century, James Gareth Endicott's commitment to peace and understanding, his willingness to stand by his commitments, even when these were unpopular or came at great personal cost, is worth reflecting on, perhaps now more than ever. Thank you, and we hope you'll enjoy the exhibition.
Thank you so much, Mark. It has been so great pleasure working with you. Okay, so next I'd like to invite Marion Endicott to speak on behalf of the Endicott family. Marion, one of the 13 grandchildren of James and Mary Endicott, is a retired advocate for injured workers in Ontario's legal clinic system, part of Legal Aid Ontario. Marion has had the good fortune to visit China several times. Her first trip was in 1975 when she and her sister Lorraine traveled with their father Stephen Endicott and their grandfather James G. Endicott. It was a 6-week journey around the country where they had the chance to explore many aspects of Chinese society. The last trip was in 2011 when Stephen Endicott brought 16 family members to visit significant locations connected to the Endicott story in China. Please welcome Marion.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Excuse me, I'm going to have a rough throat, I know it. Well, just to begin, a moment of history, and that is that in 2 weeks' time, it will be the 100th anniversary of the day that James Gareth Endicott proposed to marry Elsie Austin, and she accepted. And that began their remarkable life's journey together that has been captured in this very special exhibit today. I haven't had time to take it all in, but my goodness, it's really wonderful. So James Endicott went to China following in his parents' footsteps to save China from itself. Its poverty, illiteracy, many social problems, and ignorance of God. He went to give a helping hand. He was going home, in a way, and Mary was going to a whole new world. His and theirs appetite was part of a great appetite in the Christian world to venture forth to such places as China. It was a very respectable thing to do. But just over 2.5 decades later, in the 1950s, he was labeled by the Canadian press as public enemy #1. And the Canadian government was contemplating trying him for treason, for which the penalty was death. This trajectory is one which James Endicott was pleased to explore in a talk which he gave annually for some 25 years in my father's classes in modern Chinese history at York University. The talk was titled, "How did the Chinese Revolution become intelligible and acceptable to me as a Christian?" This is part of what makes his life so interesting. Not so much what he was able to change in China, but how China changed him. And how in the end, he went from being respectable to one who in the 1940s had become friends with communists who were embroiled in a revolution. And he saw that it was they who would save China and truly bring well-being to her people. That observation and conclusion was not easy to say publicly, and it cost him, and for that matter, it cost many members of the Endicott family, plenty of trouble on Canadian soil. But we are proud of him. Those of my generation in the family remember him well. He was a great storyteller, and he told much of experience with a flourish of poetry and in vivid expression, often holding up a Canadian stamp from the year of 1898, the year that he was born, which shows the world covered in red. Oh, upside down. Whoops. Should look at what I'm doing before I do it. Shows the extent of the British Empire at that time. And he would chuckle at how that was what he was brought up in and how things had changed. We have lots of memories of a loving grandfather who was just as happy building a backyard skating rink complete with boards, playing goalie with gusto, and just as happy as holding forth at family gatherings on the state of the world. Excuse me. His thoughtful and courageous engagement in the world, his thoughtful and courageous engagement in the world has reverberated through the generations with ongoing commitment to social issues, and painfully important right now, as speakers have already all alluded to, for the need for peaceful coexistence. And this exhibit has caught these elements. There are many people's stories to tell in this world, and not all are told. But we in the Endicott family, and as was already mentioned, there's quite a few of us here in the audience, we are grateful that this is one finding this moment in the public eye. And we look forward to the reflections and discussions which may ensue. And I would just make a little side comment in terms of the public eye currently, and circling back to Mary, we have just found out that her book, published in 1952, 5 Stars Over China, is going to be republished in China at this time. Now, as I conclude these remarks, I hear my grandfather and my father whispering from the side, "But Marion, you haven't included any humor. No jokes." A good talk always begins with one. Anyway, I would like to take this moment to thank Mark Lush and Kara Ma. And Kara, I haven't seen you yet. Where are you? Oh, there you are. And Kara Ma, for their deep dive into this story and their careful work in producing this exhibit. It has been a pleasure to get to know them both a bit along the way. And a big thank you also to the Chengyu Tsung East Asian Library for all of its support of the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you. Okay, so now I'd like to invite another incredible curator of this exhibition, Kara Kaifang Ma. Kara is currently a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of East Asian Studies, where her research focuses on the Bishop William C. White collection of Chinese antiquities at the Royal Ontario Museum. If you take a look at to your right, you will see our Chinese rare book collection, just people who are in at front, a little bit backwards, but on your right. So that is our rare book collection acquired by Bishop White as well back in the 1930s. So the ROM and the East Asian Library actually share the founding collection. And I don't think that many people actually are aware of it. Excuse me, aware of this, the fact. So I just wanted to let you know, we have the wonderful rare book collection that came from China in 1930s when the Bishop William White acquired whole collection for Canada. So going back to Kara's academic work, she serves as the Chinese Art Research Specialist at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. For this exhibition, she has made the journey back and forth from Michigan to Toronto several times. So thank you so much, Kara. Please welcome Kara. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here to celebrate the opening of the exhibition. As some of you may know, my research focused on Canadian missionaries in China during the early 20th century. And particularly, when I first began my PhD journey, my supervisor, Dr. Chen Shen, I'm somewhere here in the room, showed me the book Rebel Out of China. And that was my first encounter with the Endicott name. And Professor will also tell me about his encounter relationship with Norman Endicott and his wife, Carolyn. And little did I know that years later, I'll be co-curating this exhibition on James Gareth Endicott's life and legacy. In this exhibition, you find many of the objects mentioned in Rebel Out of China, a biography on James Gareth Endicott, or Jim. Working with these material objects allowed us to really engage with history in new and in unexpected ways. And with telling stories through not just the written word, but through these objects, and we hope that through this exhibition, that the objects and the stories told through them will also provide you with new perspectives and perhaps a deeper understanding of particular moments in history that you may be already familiar with. As my co-curator Mark and many others have already mentioned, this exhibition arrives at a time of heightened political tension and division, much where I now currently work and reside. And our hope is that this will offer an opportunity for reflection, understanding, and most importantly, listening, especially to the stories and memories that the Endicott family has so generously shared with us. And to entrust Mark and I to be able to tell the story in the exhibition. I would also like to express my thanks, especially to Marian and Val, for opening the doors at Cherrywood and allowed us to really engage in working with these objects hands-on. And to our host, the East Asian Library, to Hannah, the director of the East Asian Library, who has been a strong champion of this project at the very beginning. And Lucy again and her team for bringing the digital side of the exhibition to life. And my co-curator Mark and many of the others who made the contributions that made this vision a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. So next, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Yiqing Wu, Associate Professor in the Department of East Asian Studies here at the University of Toronto. Dr. Wu has been a key supporting faculty member for this exhibition, and also he is a dear friend of the library and heavy user of the library as well. So born and raised in Shanghai, China, he earned his MA from Columbia University and his Ph.D. from University of Chicago. His research focuses on the history, society, and politics of Mao's China, with a particular emphasis on the history and memory of the Cultural Revolution. He is the author of The Cultural Revolution at the Margins, Chinese Socialism in Crisis, published by Harvard University Press in 2014, which won the President's Book Award from the Social Science History Association and was shortlisted for the Wallace K. Ferguson Book Prize from the Canadian Historical Association. Dr. Wu will share a few words and also introduce our keynote speaker. Please welcome Dr. Wu.
Okay, thank you very much, Hannah. my work is obsolete, so I'm doing your work, trying to catch up. I hope this is not quite a joke. This is actually how myself see it. In scholars, we understand each other. So my job is to, my main job is to introduce Professor Zhong Judge. But before that, let me first of all thank again, I mean, it has been thanked profusely, everyone, Hannah, Larry, the library for making this possible, and for the two wonderful curators, co-curators, Mark Lush and Kara Ma. Mark Lush's Chinese name is Ma Jia, so Kara Ma is Ma Kaifang, so there are two Mars. In a Chinese way, I think they're related, but you may disagree, but I think they're related. In my mind, they're related. So thank you. You have really put in lots of time. I actually didn't know last semester you put in so much time, but this is wonderfully appreciated, and this is great. So let me make before I introduce Joan, let me make an embarrassing confession, just to try to be a little bit humorous. So James Endicott is such a remarkable, important man. I would characterize him as as the other Norman Bethune, the most famous Canadian in China and probably in the world. I mean China, because Mao has written about him. So, but James Endicott is, so his work is remarkable life, but I actually didn't know about him until several years ago when one of my MA students, Guo Shizhe, are you here? Guo Shizhe, yeah, you are here. When Guo Shizhe mentioned to me maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, last year. Okay, last year. So, so I started to Google. I said, oh my goodness, this is actually, James Endicott, whose name is Wen You Zhang. It's such a remarkable life I didn't know. And so when I learned that Mark is doing this project with Kara last year, I was really elated. Now everything is finally coming together. All the stars lined up. This hard work has come to fruition. We have this wonderful exhibit together. So, so now we have the privilege to have Professor Zhong Judge to deliver the keynote remarks. Professor Judge is one of the most eminent scholar on 20th century Chinese cultural and social history, who specializes in whose work focuses on knowledge cultures, print culture, and gender in early 20th century China. And she is the 2021 Guggenheim Fellow, which is extremely competitive and highly, highly prestigious. And this is sometimes I mixed up with the Genius Fellowship with the MacArthur Fellow, but this is, it's not quite, but they're the same. Anyway, this is extremely prestigious and competitive fellowship. And she's also a fellow in the Royal Society of Canada, inducted in 2018. She's author of many books. I don't want to read all the titles because that would take another 10 minutes, but I did download it, Jones. I'm sorry, I downloaded your CV last night. So the academic portion of the CV is, the CV is 22 pages, but that's only the academic portion. It does not include teaching, mentoring, service, administrative work. So when everything comes together, I think it will be more than 30 pages. So I looked at my CV, I said, in a sense of self-reflection and desire to improve. So my CV is only, with everything together, it's at 15 pages. So it will take me quite some time to catch up with you, Joan. So, but I will try. I will try harder. So Joan's. So back to Joan's all the works, but I'm not going to read all the titles, but they're all published by major university presses such as University of California Press, Stanford University Press. And the last one, the most recent one is it's going to forthcoming from University of Chicago Press with a title. I don't know if that's the current title or maybe it's that's one on the CV. The Politics of Common Reading: Vernacular Knowledge and Everyday Techniques in China, 1894 to 1954. And I'm especially intrigued by the ending year, the 1954, because that makes Joan a PRC historian, which is my field. So Joan will invite you to sit on our committees, PhD thesis committees, for PRC history. So okay, and Joan also has a personal connection to the missionary, Canadian missionary community. James Menzies is the the major Canadian missionary archaeologist, professor, the major collector of Chinese oracle bones, and who brought it lots of 35,000 pieces of oracle bones to Rome. 35,000 pieces, yes. And split in several different collections. Rome, I think, got 15,000 pieces. So was the uncle, great uncle. Uncle of your father, and and his son Arthur Menzies, who was Jones' uncle. Now it's your uncle, but James Menzies was your great uncle. Well, Arthur Menzies, who was Jones' father's cousin, who is Jones' uncle. So James Menzies was your in Chinese it's called 叔公. 叔公, yes, I'm sorry, I think. So the Arthur Menzies, who was James' uncle, was actually the Canadian ambassador to China in the late 1970s, from 1976 to 1980s. So this with this wonderful, background, all the experiences, also both as an academic and also have a personal connection to the missionary community. So so let's welcome Professor Judge. Thank you.
Leave this down. So first of all, thank you, I Ching, for that all too generous introduction, and thank you to all of you for this opportunity to learn more about and to think more about this really important chapter in Chinese history. Special thanks to Mark, who is really an exemplary organizer. He's been on this since the fall, and it's been an absolute pleasure to see this come together, and I look forward to enjoying looking more closely at what is in the fabulous exhibition. So several years ago, I happened to be at the airport in Salt Lake City and witnessed a group of Mormons sending two young men off on a mission to some far corner of the globe. The final parting words of members of the send-off party to the well-groomed and slightly terrified-looking young men was, "Don't change." I was struck by how absurd, unrealistic, and wrong this advice was. How could a 20-something youth who was about to encounter a completely different culture and way of life not change? The individuals who be the focus of my talk today, and this echoes something that Marion has said already, have more than confirmed my view. Serving in a distant country, even with a clearly defined sacred mission, leads to unanticipated personal transformations. These individuals are, of course, first of all, James Gareth Endicott, the centerpiece of this wonderful exhibit put together by Mark and Kara and Lucy Gan at the here where we are in the Zhongyutong East Asian Library. The second is James Mellon Menzies, with whom I am more familiar and who I will therefore talk about in more detail. There are convergences and divergences in the life trajectories of these two men who were born some 13 years apart, Menzies in 1885 and Endicott in 1898. Menzies was born in Clinton, Ontario, a small community of just over 3,000 people, most recently in the news as the site of a monument to the much disgraced Nobel laureate Alice Munro. Endicott was actually born in Sichuan. The two may have crossed over the Pacific Ocean in 1910, the year Menzies left for China, and the year Endicott's family returned to Canada. Both men were educated here at the University of Toronto. Menzies graduated with honors in engineering in 1907, and from the U of T Presbyterian Seminary in the spring of 1910. He later earned a Ph.D. from the Department of Archaeology in 1942. Endicott entered a triple honors course in English, history, and philosophy at Victoria College in 1919. He received an honorary doctorate of law from York University in 1983. Both men were members and representatives of the United Church of Canada. Menzies applied to and was accepted by the Foreign Missionary Committee of the Presbyterian Church in 1910, but the North Hunan Mission, where he worked, was under the United Church from 1925. In that same year, Endicott was ordained as minister of the United Church and returned to China as a missionary. Both men were educators, a key theme of this exhibit. Beyond engaging in mission work in China, they served as teachers. Menzies taught the first university course on archaeology in China at Qilu University in Jinan, Shandong Province, from 1932 to 1936. Endicott was professor of English and ethics at West China Union University, a private Christian university in Chengdu in 1940. And there's wonderful memorabilia from those days in one of the showcases. I will first explore how China changed both of these men in unanticipated ways by situating them at one pivotal moment in their own personal histories and in China's history, 1947. I will then move backwards to show how James Menzies arrived at the position he held in the late 1940s and the ramification that has had for both communities of scholars working on early China and for the Royal Ontario Museum's collection. Finally, I will briefly look forward to how James Endicott's relationship with China continued to evolve over the following decades. 1947 marked the midpoint in the Chinese Civil War, which raged from 1945 to 1949. This was much more than an intense military struggle for political control waged between the nationalists, or the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists under Mao Zedong. For both Menzies and Endicott, it was a moral struggle for the soul of China. The two men shared a primary concern with the fate of the common people caught in the Civil War. They shared the conviction that Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang was jeopardizing rather than benefiting Chinese society. Menzies worried about military aid given directly to the Kuomintang government by Western countries, particularly the US and Canada. When Canada extended $60 million in aid to the Kuomintang in 1946 to purchase Canadian military equipment, he wrote that China did not need more weapons. It had already had too many wars. He added on a personal note that the only danger his daughter would meet on the ground in China as an employee of the United Nations Refugee and Rehabilitation Agency, UNRWA, was being bombed by nationalist planes. Endicott's trepidation about the trustworthiness of the Kuomintang was based on even more direct experience. He had started out as a supporter of the party, and again we can see in one of these showcases him really raising a flag for the nationalists in the early 1940s. He had served as a social advisor to Chiang Kai-shek and as political advisor to Chiang's New Life movement, which was launched in 1934 to halt the spread of communism by teaching traditional Chinese values. By the 1940s, however, Endicott was increasingly disillusioned with the party and the movement. He saw Chiang's officers starve their troops, and he was aware of the depths of Kuomintang corruption. Most importantly, he understood that Chiang Kai-shek had deliberately held back in fighting against the Japanese from the inception of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. And this was in order to save his forces for a civil war against the Chinese Communist Party, his arch rival. Both Endicott and Menzies knew from their experience in local communities that the kind of social work the communists were determined to engage in was long overdue. Both recognized that the peasants, who were the alleged centerpiece of the communist social movement, were the most important demographic in China. In a critique of American policy in China at the time of the Civil War, Menzies wrote that this policy would never succeed, I quote, without greater understanding and without realizing that in China the only important person is the peasant. In prioritizing the peasant and criticizing the Kuomintang, both Menzies and Endicott were at odds with their own government and with their own church. In 1946, Endicott sent an urgent plea to the Canadian government to not support the Zheng regime. In an interesting convergence, James Menzies' son, Arthur Menzies, who I Ching mentioned earlier, was on the China desk at precisely this moment at External Affairs. And this is the young Arthur Menzies. Arthur warmly received Endicott's message and circulated it widely through the Canadian Diplomatic Service. This prompted Lester Pearson, Undersecretary of State for External Affairs, to write to Endicott and encourage him to continue sending on such valuable reports. The Canadian government would, however, ultimately ignore the advice of Endicott, of Menzies Sr. and Menzies Jr., and of its own External Affairs Department, and would continue to aid the Kuomintang in its civil war against the communists. It offered Zheng's regime the first post-war loan given to China by any country, so the first loan came from Canada. This was followed by supplies of munitions and bombers in 1947 and 1948. The United Church took a similar stance. In 1947, A.E. Armstrong, a leader of the Board of Overseas Missions of the United Church, made the Church's pro-Kuomintang anti-communist position clear. Corrupt as the national government is, Armstrong conceded, if I had my way, I would back them up to the limit and inflict a crushing defeat on the communist forces. Theirs is a reign of terrorism, and they are thoroughly anti-Christianity. Menzies, who was by no means a political radical, found the board's policy narrow and overly pessimistic. He maintained that if Christian missions wanted to remain in China, they had to be neutral from Cold War politics and focus on serving the people, a probably unintentional echo of Mao Zedong's rhetoric. Menzies had his own theory of how this should be done. This is very interesting. He proposed rural reconstruction, which many others had been involved in up to this moment, and also a silver plan to solve the problems of China's agricultural economic base. The country was in economic crisis, he was convinced, because of the Kuomintang's monetary policy, which prohibited the open use of silver and relied on printing an excess of paper notes. Rather than send military supplies, Menzies proposed that foreign governments should address the dire situation in China by infusing the economy with silver. This would help restore confidence in the economy and facilitate the circulation of goods. While Menzies was thus profoundly at odds with the policies of his government and his church, he did not openly embrace the communist revolution or formally break with the Board of Missions. Endicott, in contrast, did. His experience during the Civil War and at the peak moment in 1947 was one of intense inner struggle and brought him to the verge of nervous exhaustion. The only way he could resolve this inner struggle was to resign from the West China mission. The mission board interpreted his resignation as a subconscious transfer of his faith and hope from Christianity to communism. The situation was, however, much more complex. Rather than an abstract transfer of faith, it was the result of Endicott's experience of daily life in wartime China and of his profound exasperation with the willful blindness of authorities who continued to support the Kuomintang. Endicott was increasingly convinced that those who were sacrificing more and giving real leadership in this time of crisis were not those who espoused Christianity, which was Chiang Kai-shek and his wife. Rather, it was those that his missionary colleagues despised, the communists. He would uphold his conviction that the communists were the best equipped to serve the people of China for the rest of his life. Endicott's support for the communists set him on a direct collision course with his Christian missionary work. The United Church censured him in early 1950s for supporting Mao Zedong. Menzies, in contrast, was committed to reconciling or attempting to reconcile Christianity and communism. He believed that the force that would make this reconciliation possible was a spirit of compromise, which was integral to classical Chinese texts and philosophy, and manifest in the doctrine of the mean or the middle way. Members of Chinese society, including communists, would, he was convinced, trend towards equilibrium, accommodation, balance, and harmony. His logic was as follows. Because the communists that he had personally known in Beijing and Jinan were nationalists first and communists second, they would be bound as nationalists by Chinese cultural traditions and not exclusively by ideology. He traced these cultural traditions to the ancient past through 3 millennia-old oracle bones he had discovered in Hunan province. In his close parsing and analysis of the inscriptions on these bones, Menzies pieced together an understanding of ancient Chinese notions of the cosmos. He revised existing periodizations of the Shang dynasty, and most importantly, gained insights into what he called the soul and mind of China. When he set out for China in 1910, he had no intention of engaging in this kind of historical and cultural analysis. His work at the North Hunan Mission was already all-consuming. It involved making evangelistic tours of rural towns and villages. It involved building schools. And he also used his civil engineering knowledge in local projects. At the same time, his prime religious focus was on the new evangelism. And this was an approach to Christianity that highlighted the importance of culture. According to this doctrine, for the church to be a living church in China, it had to be led by educated Chinese Christians, not by foreign missionaries. It should rely on an indigenized gospel that resonated with the beliefs and experience of the local people. Christianity, therefore, had to be sinified, as Buddhism had been sinified some 1,500 years earlier. In pursuit of a fuller understanding of this process, James and his family spent 2 months in India as part of a world tour in 1928-1929, including a visit to Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha had attained enlightenment. The strategy of accommodating Christianity to the existing preoccupations of the Chinese was, of course, standard missionary operating procedure. It was pioneered in the 17th century by Jesuits such as Matteo Ricci, and in the 19th century by Protestant missionaries such as W.A.P. Martin and Timothy Richard. These earlier missionaries generally sought scientific grounds for accommodation. They responded to what they perceived to be Chinese interest in mathematical astronomy, for example, in the age of the Jesuits, and in industrial science in the age of the Protestants in the 19th century. In contrast, Menzies sought spiritual rather than material grounds for accommodation. He was convinced the roots for this shared common spiritual ground were evident in the ancient oracle bone inscriptions. Menzies believed that a divine force brought him to the oracle bones. It led him to the bank of the Huan River north of Jiangde in Hunan province, where he first sighted the bones. He wrote, "God seemed to guide me when he placed in my hands the discovery of the oracle bones, the actual relics of the ancient religious life of the Chinese, 1400 to 1200 before the Common Era." Riding his white horse along a bend in the Huan River in the spring of 1914, this divine force drew his attention to the potsherds and rubble that farmers had pushed to the edges of the fields and harrowing the ground for cotton planting. Among this rubble were the remains of Yin, the last capital of the Shang dynasty. Constructed in approximately 1300 before the Common Era, the capital had been so completely sacked by the subsequent Zhou dynasty that the site became known as the waste or ruins of Yin. Scholars considered the discovery of this site to be as important to the archaeology of ancient China as the discovery of King Tut's tomb had been to Egyptian archaeology in 1923. Profoundly modest, Menzies never took credit for first discovering the waste of Yin, which would be excavated by scholars from China's Academia Sinica after 1928. The most he would acknowledge was that he was the first foreign or Chinese archaeologist to visit the waste of Yin with a purely scientific interest in these objects. This scientific interest was focused on the characters inscribed on the oracle bones, which represent the oldest form of Chinese writing. The historical record of the Shang dynasty, the Book of Shang, included in the classic Book of History, describes the Shang custom of divination using these animal bones. A divination expert would inscribe a question on a piece of bone. So these divination experts were among the very few who were literate in this early society. And they would inscribe the question on this bone, which was generally the plastron or the lower shell of turtles or the scapula of sheep or oxen. The questions were generally on topics related to the concerns of the royal house of Shang, impending warfare, the health of the ruler, prospects for the birth of an heir. The bone would then be held over a fire, and the crack that would result from the heat would reveal the yes or no answer to the inscribed question. So they were all yes or no questions. Menzies initially collected these fragments of bone as a hobby, but this hobby soon became an obsession, earning him the nickname Old Bones by his missionary colleagues. This affectionate moniker belies the seriousness of Menzies' quest to penetrate the meanings inscribed on the bones. On the meager salary of an ordinary missionary who was raising 3 children who were all studying in international schools, he amassed the largest private collection of oracle bones in or outside of China. And I Ching has already given us this number. His collection totaled 35,913 fragments out of some 150,000 ultimately excavated at the site of the waste of Yin. So this is close to 25%. The nickname also belies the depth of Menzies' scholarly engagement with these historical artifacts. The time and money he spent on collecting the bones was nothing compared to the intellectual energy he invested in deciphering and interpreting them. He mastered the study of Chinese calligraphy and epigraphy, fields not generally in the toolkit of the Presbyterian missionary. He also laid the groundwork, did I miss one? He also laid the groundwork for the field of Chinese scientific archaeology. Menzies strove to understand both the field of archaeology and this formative stage in human civilization in comparative context. On his family world tour in 1928-29, when they went to India, he also sought out archaeologists and museum directors in each ancient site they visited. Their route of travel included every possible archaeological dig from Baghdad to Babylon, from Damascus to Baalbek, sites that would be impossible to visit today. In one instance in Jerusalem, Menzies not only observed, but fortuitously, as a field surveyor for the American School of Oriental Studies had fallen ill, actively participated in these digs. It was this acquired expertise that earned Menzies an academic appointment at Qilu University in Jinan, Shandong Province, where he taught the first university course on archaeology in China in Chinese. The invitation, which initially came from the university in 1931, was sent again with greater urgency in January of 1932. Qilu had just received money from the Harvard Yenching Institute to undertake research in the fields of history and archaeology in China. The associate president of the university had immediately identified Menzies as splendidly fitted for the job. While James would always remain a man of the cloth, his mission in China had taken what was an unanticipated turn, from purely evangelical to scholarly. The years 1932 to 36, when he taught at Qilu, were arguably the most productive of his career and quite possibly among the happiest of his life. Here he is with his wife, and this is his home, which I visited in 2015, still standing with a plaque. At Tsinghua University, he was able to advance his research on the oracle bone inscriptions. His focus was on Shang religion, his driving impetus, his quest to find evidence of shared spiritual ground, to find God in ancient Chinese culture. He would ultimately conclude that the ancient Shang people who lived about the time of Moses in the Bible had worshipped a god they called Shangdi. The Jesuits had put forward a similar idea in the 17th century, which had been vociferously rejected by successive popes who could not accept that the Chinese also had a singular god, or that they shared with Christians a commensurable notion of religiosity. Menzies, in contrast, was committed to proving that they did. He believed that his philological work on the oracle bone inscriptions permeated deeper into Chinese life, those are his words, than his rural evangelical work. It provided evidence that the Christian God was also the God of the Chinese. One could cynically ask if a certain false consciousness was at play here. If Menzies legitimized his passion for scholarly study of the oracle bones to his evangelist colleagues and superiors by linking it to notions of God, or whether his deep faith in the Christian God led him to see what he saw in the oracle bone inscriptions. Questions Menzies himself may even have had trouble answering. However we interpret his devotion to decoding the cultural messages etched onto the surface of the oracle bones, it's clear that China was infinitely more to him than a heathen land in need of moral, spiritual, or political uplift. Nor was it merely an opportune site for the pillaging of valuable artifacts. Of the 35,913 oracle bones Menzies collected, over 30,000 remained in China. They are dispersed among the Shandong Provincial Museum, the National Palace Museum in Beijing, and the Nanjing Museum. Only after his death was his personal study collection acquired by the Rom from his family. Menzies had taken this collection with him when he left China in 1936 for what he thought would be a brief furlough in Canada. He had every intention of returning, but war and revolution intervened. In 1937, when Japanese armies occupied North China, Tsinghua University, where Menzies was teaching, was forced to evacuate to free China in Sichuan province. World War II, the Civil War, and the founding of the People's Republic of China would follow. To Menzies' deep regret, neither he nor the oracle bones he had taken with him would ever return to China. While he was not able to return, he has left a cultural legacy in China, a familial legacy in Canada, and a scholarly legacy at the ROM that promised to sustain the interpersonal and academic engagement with China to which he dedicated his life. Despite his conviction that conciliation and harmony were fundamental to Chinese culture and would remain so even under the communists, and despite his missionary devotion to improving the lives of ordinary rural Chinese, Menzies was condemned as a cultural imperialist and thief of cultural artifacts under the Chinese Communist regime in the 1950s. He would not be rehabilitated until the post-Mao era. His contribution to oracle bone studies was first recognized in a modest museum in Anyang, the recently renovated Inshu Museum. In 2004, his former residence in Anyang was declared a protected treasure. And a James Mellon Menzies Memorial Museum for Oracle Bone Studies was established. James' son, Arthur, born in China in 1916, as we said before, extended his father's missionary engagement into the diplomatic realm. Arthur rejoined the Canadian Department of External Affairs in 1940 after doing postgraduate work at Harvard. His extremely successful career culminated in the posting he had long coveted, ambassador to China in 1976, as post-Mao China opened up to the world. Before his death in March of 2010, at the age of 93, Arthur established a living legacy in his father's name at the ROM. In 2009, he generously endowed the James Menzies Research Fund, which brings Chinese scholars to the ROM to advance scholarship on the Menzies collection. Arthur insisted that this fund was exclusively to support Chinese scholars. This would not be for junkets for Western scholars to go to China. The fellowship thus not only assures the continuation of James Mellon Menzies' meticulous academic work, it reflects his most passionate belief that the Chinese must be the prime custodians of their own cultural heritage. James G. Endicott's engagement with China was as passionate as James Menzies had been, if differently channeled and less quietistic. His criticism of the Kuomintang and support for the communists, which we noted earlier in discussing the year 1947, would deepen and intensify in the following decades. Just as Menzies suffered the opprobrium of the Chinese Communist government despite his intention to serve the people, Endicott suffered the opprobrium of some members of the Canadian government and the Canadian public, despite his clear-eyed, informed, and accurate criticism of the corruption of the nationalist regime. When he returned to China in 1947, the media denounced him as traitorous. Lester Pearson, who had welcomed his early overtures to the Department of External Affairs and who had been a college friend, called him a red stooge. The church he had served openly criticized him, and the government, as we've already heard from Miriam, threatened to charge him with treason and sedition. Rather than retreat in the face of this widespread denunciation, Endicott advanced his global commitment to creating a better world. In 1949, the year the People's Republic of China was established, he founded and served as chairman of the Canadian Peace Congress. From 1957 to 71, he was president of the International Institute for Peace. In 1950, he signed a petition that began the Ban the Bomb movement, and he served as a member of the World Peace Council committee that drafted the Stockholm Peace Appeal. He was ultimately rehabilitated in some quarters in China, as Menzies had been in China. In 1982, the United Church apologized for having denounced him. Endicott had not, however, wavered in his views. His ongoing support for the Maoist regime led him to ultimately break with the Soviet Union, despite having received the Stalin Prize in 1952. He feared the communist mission was betrayed in post-Mao China. He was critical of Mao Zedong's pragmatic successor, Deng Xiaoping. He considered those who attempted to push the regime in a still further reformist direction as traitors to the revolution. He read the Tiananmen protests in 1989 as a counter-revolutionary movement and criticized a lot of the leaders for being agents for capitalist restoration. To conclude, neither James Mellon Menzies nor James Gareth Endicott remained unchanged by their experience in China. For Menzies, it was the place where he found what was perhaps his true calling in life. Trained as an engineer, ordained as a minister, his deepest commitment was to physically unearthing and carefully parsing ancient clues to what he understood to be the soul of China. China also provided Endicott with the opportunity to deepen what were more latent tendencies when he was first ordained as minister and returned to China as missionary in 1925. As a student at the U of T, he had a clear skeptical bent. He was deeply influenced, for example, by the work of Albert Schweitzer, who had written what was at the time a controversial book on the historical Jesus. Unlike the Mormon crowd I opened my talk with, Endicott viewed change as integral to true faith. He believed that one's moral compass had to be aligned with that force in human life that pushes forward towards the new, towards the solution of contradictions in the direction of making life better. Whatever we may think of his vision of a better life, his commitment to striving is an invaluable teaching, directly in line with the theme of this exhibit, education for troubled times, and highly resonant in our own troubled times. Thank you very much.
where the questions go.
Sure, okay. So, we'd like to open up the floor for questions, and maybe for about 20 minutes, and we will move on to our reception. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and our staff will bring a microphone to you. Who would like to start? Okay, am I seeing a hand at the back? Any comments, feedback about the exhibition and the talk as well? Yes, I think I see the hand.
Okay.
First of all, professors, thank you so much for the talk. I just had a question. Whether, to what extent do you think, I think generational values shaped, like Arthur Menzies was like the son of James Menzies, right? And like, I think that his James Menzies' legacy really shaped, I think, like Arthur Menzies' upbringing. I think that's the case for a lot of other Mish kids and like missionaries, children of missionaries. Do you think, to what extent do you think the family's values shaped like these individuals' interests in like Chinese archaeology and like world peace, as opposed to just like personal like interest?
Certainly they did, and Arthur Menzies' daughter is here, and she could probably, yes, Nora is here. And Nora, I can tell you, is a wonderful human being, also committed to these kinds of, projects that really just work to make the world better. So I think we went from pretty intense religiosity with James Mellon Menzies, less so with Arthur, and probably even less so with subsequent generations, but the same kind of commitment. I mean, Arthur had, I didn't know James Mellon Menzies. He died before I was born, but I knew Arthur very well, and the depth of his knowledge of and commitment to China and to doing things that would improve the situation in China was just remarkably deep. And this is why he created this fund and absolutely insisted, echoing the desire of his father, that this was not a fund that was going to fuel research here. It was a fund that would bring scholars from China to work on the artifacts that James had collected, and then to enrich cultural and historical understanding in China itself. So definitely, generational shifts in terms of the way people framed this commitment maybe, but still the same kind of commitment and this sort of very heartfelt desire to do what was best for the Chinese people, who all of these generations felt were caught in the crosshairs of really horrific world and national events.
Thank you very much for everybody for this fantastic exhibition and your talk. It's a two-part question. We get to know about Norman Butane so much because of the Mao talk about him. Perhaps as a historian you can explain why it's neglected in terms of people later on getting to know Endicott and Menzies. And the second question is, Menzies, though they discovered the bones, oracle bones, but he's so modest not to claim credit. Is there a particular reason? And also why he was demonized during the, Cultural Revolution as an imperialist archaeologist?
Okay. So to start with the last first, and then I'll see if I can remember the first. Demonized as all foreigners were. The fact that, he was, from the Western world, and he was, supposedly taking artifacts out of China, even though his intention was to study them when he was in Canada and bring them back. So I think there was like a blanket condemnation. I don't think it was anything personal by any stretch. Except for, Bethune was different because of the close association with Mao. I guess there was just so much more distance between somebody like Menzies and the communists that he didn't have people who were his advocates in the inner circle as Bethune did. So I would think that would be part of the reason. And the first question again was about the. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think he was that. That was just very much who he was. And again, he felt that, these were things that, he found on the ground in China, and what right did he have to sort of put his name on them or get some kind of glory from just having started to dig these things up. So it goes to character and goes to what his mission was, which was really just to deepen and to help the Chinese deepen the understanding of their own culture.
The other question is, China and Mao sort of make importance of the Bhutan, maybe for political reasons, but then downplay the contribution of Menzies and Endicott.
Yeah, I don't know exactly downplayed. I mean, now it's being upplayed. I mean, Menzies got this, this home, his home has become a site of a museum, and there's this museum of the Oracle Bones. So, and I think these are sort of more, I wouldn't say local, but maybe regional initiatives. They're not really coming from the top. And, they've got nothing to do with politics. So it's people who are, locally invested or invested in the study of Oracle Bones. Shandong University, they've got amazing exhibits and scholarly commitment to digging deeper into, the kind of work that Menzies did. But it's more sort of localized than, something national.
Thank you, Professor Judge, for this wonderful talk and also for introducing us to this heartfelt story of a missionary whose personal journey, like two missionaries whose personal journeys can actually help us understand this grand history of China-Canadian relation in the 20th century. As a graduate student at the University of Toronto and also as an international student studying abroad, I'm asking like a very simple question that is, among all these very exciting events, the many aspects of understanding these personal journeys, which are the aspects that you think are the most valuable for graduate students to study further? That is to say, like, what are the most exciting as well as unexplored part and materials that could be used to further our understanding of the changing of the relation between China and Canada throughout the past and also continuing to the future? Thank you for that.
Great question. I think, there are just so many angles that, and so many, directions you could go with the kind of things that these stories open up. I was very intrigued by James Menzies' wife, who taught in a girls' school in Henan. And, there are letters that are in, I hope they're still in the family archive, Nora. But I think, that piece of the story would be really fascinating to get a sense of what it was like for a woman missionary. We know a lot about the men and the grand contributions that they made. But, these women were helping to spread literacy in these communities and really transforming things on another level. So I think there are many different directions you could go, everything from archaeology to, thinking really deeply about culture, which I think is what James Menzies called to us to do, and to, try and think about, convergences in these values that are so profound and integral to different cultures, and can they really speak to each other? So I think it really depends on your bent. Are you interested in philosophy, in archaeology, in gender? I think there's something there for everybody. And I think there's so much. I think it was Marion who talked about how things are in boxes, or was it Mark? Mark who talked about things being in boxes. And, they are. And unfortunately, we teach them that way, and we approach them that way as grad students. But it's really sort of breaking down the walls of those boxes and seeing how things in the boxes talk to each other. That's where the really exciting work can be done.
Thank you very much. Assuming the hypothesis is correct that during the time of the Shang Dynasty there was an endogenous form of monotheism, what happened to it after the fall of the Shang Dynasty?
Well, Shangdi didn't go away, but there was sort of, a whole cosmos of religious belief and figures around it. So heaven, Shangdi is like the notion of heaven, which continues to be the most important feature of Chinese religion. But there are many other features, and there are many different religions. And, some would say Confucianism is a religion. You've also got Buddhism, you've got Taoism. But I think the notion of there being sort of this all-encompassing heaven would probably be what Menzies would say was, sort of the equivalent of, thinking about Shangdi and thinking about God. But I don't think there's really ever been any clear sense that there was anything approaching monotheism in China. It's always been incredibly pluralistic. So what exactly he was trying to get at, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've wished I could have that conversation with him. But he was either seeing something that, seeing more there than was there, or like I said, possibly trying to justify all the energy he was putting into oracle bone study by saying, but I'm looking for God. So tough question. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I'm actually interested, maybe a family member can help to answer this question too. I'm actually interested in the religious perspective of Mr. James Endicott. So I understand that he was rejected by the government, Canadian government, because of political views, probably. But does his religious view, is it because his religious view doesn't align with the United Church, or was it also a political issue?
I think Marion could answer better than I could, or Mark, but I would just want to say that it's the United Church and the Canadian government that sort of set up this dichotomy between Christianity and communism and sort of declared that, one could not hold both at the same time. I don't know. I don't know enough about Endicott to know if he continued to be a believer, but I'll believe that, you get at God through sort of the way the communists were dealing with social problems. But I think the issue wasn't Endicott's as much as it was the churches and the governments.
Yeah. So just to give some clarification too, I know that Endicott, he had a tough time getting ordained, like when he was going to become an ordained minister. So this is related in the book Rebel Out of China too, which you'll see referenced, his biography written by his son Stephen Endicott. But he had a difficult time getting ordained because he was part of the student Christian movement and other student Christian movements on campus. Some of them were involved in missionary work, but also the works of Sharman. What's Sharman's first name? I'm blanking on it now. Sharman, so I think Joan also referred to it in your talk, right? Studying the works of Jesus as a man. Versus more dogmatic interpretations. So this was controversial at the time at Victoria University, after the First World War, attending these kind of seminars and engaging with these ideas. What was this person, Jesus, like? How can we understand his charitable works? This was not in the mainstream of Christianity or missionary work, certainly. But there were a lot of young missionaries who came out of Victoria who were very big supporters of Sharman's work. And so they brought those works to Sichuan as well, to China. So, they were also part of a kind of youth movement within that, which was controversial within the church. I can't say whether in his later years he maintained his faith in Christianity or not. But we do know certainly, and part of the exhibit shows, in the 1950s, he certainly wrote a lot of texts and pamphlets arguing about the possible coexistence of Christianity and communism. That was a big part of his work. So whether he personally still believed, I'm not sure, but certainly he believed that there could be coexistence, right, between different ideas, between different sets of political beliefs. So I think that was important to him, certainly. I don't know if you want to add anything, Marion. Sure.
Why not? So I would simply add, building on what you've already said, and you as well, that he maintained his faith, he maintained his concept of Christianity and what he should do as a Christian, but that was not his emphasis. The Christian church was well established. It was the New World that was not well established, and that's where his emphasis was. And that emphasis did not sit well with the established church, and hence he ran into his trouble. But when the church re-embraced him, he welcomed that. He did not decide to take up the role of a minister freshly. He was on a different mission, which was around world peace. So I think that. Oh, who do I give this to?
Yeah, so in brief, a skeptic from, the beginning. So his faith was always grounded in skepticism. And, like I tried to say at the end, too, it was a faith that, part of his faith was that believing that you had to keep changing because, the world, there were a lot of things that had to be improved.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, for the wonderful talk. My question is, so towards the end there, you said that the vision and the missions of Endicott and Menzies, they seldom changed throughout their lives. But what I wonder is the goal and the policies of the Chinese Communist Party has changed a lot in the 20th century. Like in the Civil War period, Mao advocates for a new democratic revolution, which is also what the Kuomintang proposed in the 1910s. But later Mao, after the formation of New China, proposed against the new democratic revolution. And later in the 1960s, even reached the Cultural Revolution. I wonder, in all these change of policies of the Communist Party and during all these historical events, did the views of Menzies and Endicott for the Communist Party ever change, or they also stayed consistent with their missions and their goals?
Yeah, again, I'm going to defer to Marion because she knows more about the later history. Menzies was not alive, so he didn't see and didn't have to come to terms with how things changed. It seemed that Endicott, as I said at the end, that he remained committed to his understanding of Maoism and felt that that was betrayed in the post-Mao era by Deng Xiaoping and by other trends. So he did not change as the party sort of opened up. I don't know exactly what his thoughts were in the Cultural Revolution. Maybe Marion can give us
Well, James Gareth Endicott began publishing the Canadian Far Eastern newsletter when he arrived back in Canada. And his mission in that newsletter was to continually have the English-speaking world know China as well as he could possibly convey it. And he read copious amounts. All of us of my generation and the family, I maybe remember visiting him in his home, and there were just piles of newspapers and books and leaflets all surrounding him, and he read it all. Materials from China, materials written by Westerners on China, scholarly, more popular, but more scholarly. It came from all possible sources in the English language. And he, I believe that he was somebody who always read and thought with the mind to understand as well as he could what was the truth of the matter. Not that it's easy to ever tell what's the truth of the matter at any given moment. But his idea was, his adherence to Mao's vision of China was based on serve the people. Just that simple phrase, serve the people, and as he saw the changes occurring in China in the post-Mao era, he felt that what was happening was not going to serve the people so well. So it doesn't mean he didn't have criticisms, he didn't have worries during the Cultural Revolution, all that kind of thing. But fundamentally, he felt that something good was going on there. And he, again, his job was to have the rest of the world understand it as best possible. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Thank you so much. So I know you have some burning questions, but the food is waiting for us, as you can smell it. So I would like to, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Judge for the very insightful talk for today. Please give her a big applause. Thank you.